Well, so let's jump to the end of the book, which I suspect it's at the end for a reason and not the front, because you didn't want to create just yet another list of schools that everyone focuses on and jockeys for. But you do have a list with some very interesting schools on it. The new Dream School list, it's in the appendix. But what perhaps for me was most interesting about it, and why I thought we might start there, is the criteria for the new Dream School list. And that criteria sort of mirrors many of the preceding chapters in the book that you've walked through, with some real quantitative force behind the points that you use to then create this very interesting list. So maybe if you could just talk through the criteria itself, perhaps, and how you selected the measures, because it actually provides like a nice roadmap or overview, I think, of the book itself, Jeff.
I mean, everybody loves names, right? Everybody, every time I go talk about higher ed, people say, tell me colleges, name some names, right? They want that shortcut. So I kind of was moved into doing the list for that reason, because I knew people would ask me anyway. I will be honest with you, Michael, this list has caused me a lot of heartache, because, it's not that these are 70, as I say in the book, this is a starting point. This is not a rankings, but I know people will make that assumption. I'm already, the early copies of the book were out, and I've already had some people say, well, why aren't we on the list?
Why am I not on it? Yeah.
Right. So it's going to cause me that heartache. But in many ways, I did want to give people examples. And so here's what we did. We looked at, 75. There's no magic number around that. And again, it's not a rankings. The first filter was acceptance rate. The problem with most rankings out there or lists is that they have the same top colleges on them all the time. And by the way, they're all impossible to get into. I did this rough calculation the other night across Forbes and US News and LinkedIn and the Wall Street Journal. If you kind of combine all those top 10 schools, the average acceptance rate's like 7%. So it's all great. These rankings are great, but if you can't get into the places, how helpful?
Where do you go from there?
So, right. So our filter had to have an acceptance rate of at least 25%. These are a moving target every year, but essentially 25%. And actually, most of them are not even close to that. They're 30s and the 30s, 40s, some in the 60s and 70s. So there are some schools on there that people will say, really, Jeff, you put that school on there? But there's other reasons why it's on there that I'll get to in a second. The other filter was at least 1,000 undergraduates. And you know why that is. A lot of small colleges in financial trouble. I didn't want to put any of those colleges on the list. I'm not saying that every college under 1,000 students is in financial trouble, but we know that's a cutoff for a lot of schools in terms of just having a sustainable financial model. Then what did we look at? Okay, so once we went through those filters, we looked at price to earnings ratio. Like, how much is it going to cost you to go here for 4 years? Michael Itzkowitz, who was the first director of the Obama scorecard, helped me out with that. And we looked at price to earnings ratio. We also worked with Bain and Company on a list of what I call institutions that punch above their weight. We know that outcomes are highly dependent on who comes in the door. So we looked at institutions that do better on graduation rates and do better on earnings based on the student body that they have. I worked with our mutual friend, Matt Singelman at the Burning Glass Institute, because we also wanted to look at what are the outcomes that we're looking at besides earnings? Because we know, for example, that colleges that have lots of STEM grads and lots of business majors end up doing well. And so I didn't want to have essentially, the Bentleys of the world and the Babsons of the world leading this, or the Colorado School of the Mines, things like that have heavy STEM majors or heavy business majors leading this effort. I also worked with the folks at the National Survey of Student Engagement and matching the list up to schools that are on their list. They would not release their results to me, but we were matching up around around outcomes around student engagement. I mentioned geographic diversity there for a second because that was the last filter that I used. I wanted to make sure that we didn't just have schools all in the Northeast or all in the Southeast. So that's where a little bit of my thumb on the scale came. We looked at both public and private. 60% of the list approximately is public, and there's a nice geographic range to the schools, and that's how we ended up with our 75.
So part of the beginning of your answer there was that is part of the big underlying premises of the book, right? Which is that as a culture, we've over-indexed perhaps on the elite colleges, those highly selective ones. And you sort of have to attack that up front, because I think otherwise people won't believe the rest of the book is worthwhile. And so, look, for the elite colleges, there aren't that many of them. They're really hard to get into with lots of demand, given that students complete loads more applications today than they did when you applied on your typewriter. And the schools spend less than 15 minutes, right, reviewing your application. And yet they have this huge weight emotionally, culturally, socially. I mean, you have this anecdote, someone telling the head of MIT admissions that not getting into MIT ruined their kid's life. Crazy, saying that to someone whose daughter died of fentanyl poisoning, by the way, as you relate in the book. But it seems like there are a few big arguments that lead you to make this case. And first is what I'll call functional argument number one, that yes, going to an elite school is like getting an extra lottery ticket, but otherwise it's actually less determinative than we think it is. Can you share more by what you mean around that?
Yeah, and that really comes from David Deming's work at Opportunity Insight with the Raj Chetty folks at Harvard, the work that they've done. And I think it's important to say up front here, Michael, this book is not a screed against the elites in the Ivy Leagues and Ivy Pluses and the best universities we have in the US. I love them for the reason is that they are known throughout the world as having just high quality students. I think we should invest in high quality students. I think we should invest in federal research and research in general. I think that these institutions should not be taken down, but you can actually keep lifting them up while you also lift up other institutions as well to say, hey, these aren't the only places. And I'm also not telling people, by the way, don't apply there. We're an aspirational society. We should still continue to apply there. But again, 7% acceptance rate overall, essentially. So you're probably not going to get in. And so you have to have a backup plan, which is really the purpose of Dream School. And as David Deming said to me, that those kids do better overall, but we also tend to over-index on the outliers with those institutions. In other words, we always have the anecdote of the kid who went to Harvard or Yale or Princeton or Stanford or Amherst and killed it in the working world, or went on to great graduate schools or made a ton of money. But the average, as David points out, the average students at those places are not that much different than the students at a rung or even two down the ladder, largely again at big public universities, that they're not that much different in terms of their earnings over their lifetime. Now, where they are different is that, as he pointed out, somebody who who graduates from Harvard will probably get to work at the New York Times, and somebody who graduates from Ohio State will get to work at the Columbus Dispatch. But they're still going to have great careers, slightly different perhaps. But I think this is the thing that we often lose in this. We think, oh my God, you have to get into this Ivy Plus to make money and have a great career, and everybody else kind of like is left with the scraps. And that just doesn't happen the way this narrative sometimes happens. And I wanted to attack those myths, because in many ways they are myths, head on, and which we did in the book.